Namaskar. The COVID phase 2 has hit us pretty badly. It is on the wane now, and I think this is a good time for us to take stock and to see calmly what were the causes and how we dealt with it, and also look at things that have not probably appeared in mainstream media, probably things which have got hidden, good things also, good practices which have got hidden, in all the paranoia and mania that has hit mainstream media during this period. And we can also have a look at the death rate. Now that seems to be the obsession, isn't it? For the media, of course, but also on social media. I'm sure many of us are also discussing with our friends and family when we sit over a cup of tea, as to how many have died, there is a constant updation of statistics. And then there is the disbelief. Oh, that isn't true. More people have died. Or the other way around, this is too much, maybe less have died. I don't know. I don't know what you believe in, but we should get that sorted out here, isn't it? Because we have much more serious issues and much more beneficial issues to talk about in anticipation of phase 3. Have you sometimes had a doubt in your mind that there is something wrong with the figures being presented? Have you sometimes felt that there is somebody who doesn't want the figures to come out as they should appear? I did some research on this, and you're right. And interestingly, there are two lobbies, one which is in favor of getting higher numbers reported, and another which is in favor of lower numbers being reported. Now the lower number, of course, is the government, isn't it? Governments everywhere, because they feel that it is a reflection on their performance, and it is in many cases. It has brought out their incompetence in many cases. But because politicians are so keen to on their image management, and they want to win the re-election, they would try their best to portray that the COVID has been handled correctly and that the deaths are lesser than they actually are. And that has happened. That has happened worldwide, and I'm reading reports that in many cases, in many countries, in many cities, they are now revising the figures and saying no, the death rates were higher. Even in India, there has been a revision. The Maharashtra government has revised. I believe some other governments have also revised their death rates. And it is obvious that our governments, the central government led by the Prime Minister, as well as many states, not all states, but many states, UP in particular, say, and Bihar possibly, are actively trying to downplay the deaths. But you may be surprised to know that there is this other very strong lobby which right from day one has been trying to get as many cases reported as COVID death cases, even if there is a suspicion. And this lobby is very strong because it is led by the WHO itself. The WHO gave a guideline to all nations. India too followed that guideline on how death should be reported. This they did last year at the very beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. And what they say is very interesting. You can check this on their website. And the guideline says that COVID-19 should be recorded on the medical certificate as the cause of death for all decedents where the disease is either caused or suspected to be caused or suspected to have contributed to the death of the patient. What happened is that every nation wanted to diligently comply with the WHO guidelines, and especially in the first 6 to 8 months, there was a reckless reporting of COVID-19 deaths, even when it was not due to COVID-19, because even if the doctor suspected or suspected that it contributed to the death, then in those cases it was recorded in the death certificate as COVID positive. The issue here is that there are ample evidences, leading doctors from many leading institutions last year itself brought this to light and said, look, there are patients coming who have a long history of other illnesses, but because they are also COVID positive, or worse, they turn out to be COVID negative. But the doctors, there's so much pressure on the hospital and doctors, that okay, did he have breathing trouble? Of course he did. I mean, he had a pulmonary ailment or a cardiac ailment. He was 85 years old. He did have some breathing problems. Okay, let's put it as suspected COVID-19. That's what has happened and is also happening right now. The other interesting part is that how can WHO collate all information? Their intention is to collate information as fast as possible so that they can give an adequate response. We are not questioning all the intention here, but the fact is that in trying to quantify things, rather than deal with it qualitatively, which is what a medical case is. It's a very qualitative, case-by-case specific issues. But in the attempt to quantify it, to get the statistics fast, they gave a guideline for the doctors to just fill in 2 codes. They gave a code of U07.1 if the patient has COVID positive and has died, and they also had U07.2, where the COVID test has come negative. It's not identified, but the doctor the doctor suspects that COVID could probably be also there, even though the test came negative. And then in the statistics, in the compilation of statistics, both U7.1 and 7.2 were together clubbed as the reason, as the COVID death, and the count therefore was affected by this methodology adopted by the WHO. So this classification, the coding of where the forms have to be filled in the hospitals, the WHO has a very clear explanation for it. They say the purpose of mortality classification is to produce the most useful statistics possible. Therefore, always apply these instructions, whether they can be considered medically correct or not. This is what the WHO says, and one can check this. Why do I say that there is this lobby which wants more numbers? WHO is a big institution, the Director General of WHO, we're not casting aspersions, but the fact is that the WHO of late has been completely controlled by the Bill Gates, Melinda Gates Foundation, which is so actively wanting to propagate vaccines. Bill Gates himself is a big investor in pharma companies, and so there is even in the medical community, in the top echelons of the medical community internationally, there's a growing disgust with this control of WHO, which has gone away from its real doctors to corporations, pharma companies who stand to gain by spreading fear. It is quite unimaginable for us the amount of money to be made by pharmaceutical corporations. Pfizer and BioNTech have said that they expect to make $15 billion, not million, dollars out of the COVID crisis. And another company, Moderna, has written to its shareholders saying they expect to make $18.3 billion out of their COVID vaccine. And it's a sorry state of affairs, and I'm not very happy reporting this. But we cannot live, in a dream world where we believe that the pharma companies are out there for us, and they're there to treat the sick and to contribute. It's not exactly like that, and it is known now for many decades how the pharma industry spends hundreds of millions of dollars in lobbying, which is a word for corruption, and lobbying with politicians, with governments the world over, and so that they can influence policy in their favor. And when such a big opportunity arises, they are going to make that killing out of this. I mean, it's a sad way to put it, making a killing when people are already dying, but that is true. It is happening. So when I say that the death cases of COVID death cases have been, there are flaws in its recording. The flaws are from both sides. One on the one side from the pharma corporations, and who have influenced WHO to give a very faulty guidelines on certifying the death, and which all the governments have blindly followed. And secondly, on the other side, the flaw is from the local governments, from the local administrators, who have tried to they've resorted to some kind of juggling of figures to show lower death rates, because they feel that will reflect on their performance. Whether the two actually average out and the result, what we are seeing, the figures are actually true, we will never know all this till after many years, when all the sources of information are openly available to the analysts. Why is the media giving so much hype to the death issue? Such a morbid interest, isn't it? Rather than taking a holistic view and asking the right questions so that we can gain something useful from this experience of COVID and see to it that it is not repeated the world over. But I don't see the media taking that approach. There are two reasons for it. One is, of course, the short-term view. The media is always looking at the eyeballs. They're always looking at TRPs. They are sensationalizing everything, and what more sensationalism than death, and they keep repeating these phrases over and over again about oh, so many dying, and the numbers aren't correct. It's much more than that, and that kind of hysteria which they create is they feel that it's adding to their commercially, it's adding to their bottom line, because more TRPs, more advertisements. I don't know how they think. No sane man can think the way mainstream media thinks today. But there's another factor. I am from the media myself. My background is from journalism, and so I know the number of good journalists wanting to do good sound reporting. And why would they also be caught in this whole trap of this COVID hysteria? Why would they be caught in it? And I think the reason for that is what can we call it? We can call it conditioning, with good intentions in their hearts, but their minds are so conditioned that this is the one story. The story coming from the corporations, story coming from the WHO, which they may not even question, that why is it controlled by corporations, and the story coming from top down. We don't know anything. Those are the experts. We must listen to the experts. This is a very, very deep conditioning, and it's there in many of us too. How easily we become obedient, to some protocol without questioning the science of it. And somehow these journalists, many of them I know, are really good journalists trying to do an honest reporting, but they've got carried away because of this conditioning in their minds. And where, yes, they have the one good quality that the journalists should have, which is to question the government, which they are doing, but they have a blind side, and they do not question this one single story, one single story about health and how health situation can be reformed. And that single story they're not really able to question as of now. It is good that that all these statistics and the various reporting of COVID and what's happening, all that is in front of us. It has a good side, because we must have information, so that we can make things better. But it is also true that we must see things in a wider, more holistic way. For instance, about 3.8 lakh people have died of COVID, according to the given statistics at the moment. 3.8 lakh COVID deaths. Do you know that 1.6 to 1.8 lakh people die of cancer every year in India? And if you multiply 1.6 lakh by the last 10 years, by the last 20 years, what do we get? I mean, this virus, COVID, has come and it will go away, just like the H1N1 came and went, and the others before that. And of course, with vaccination, people are hoping that this will not come again, at least in this variant. But what do you think would happen if every day when you open the newspaper or switch on the television, someone was throwing at you figures of how many people died of cancer every day? Do you also know that 1.5 lakh people die in road accidents every year in India? Very preventable, isn't it? And 70% of those are young people on two-wheelers. How will you feel if every day you open the newspaper, open a news app, and all you get is information about how many people died of road accidents every day, how many people died of cancer every day? But you don't read those, do you? Why? And there are other diseases too. There is no vaccine for cancer. If there was, rest assured, the pharma industry will make sure, through the WHO, through our health ministries, it will make sure that the media, the right media, the mainstream media, is screaming about it every day until they can sell their vaccine to the entire population. It's a very simple story of mercenary economics at play, and it is unfortunate, but yet it has to be said, because we cannot live in a dream world thinking that these pharma companies are there for us, they're doing such a great job, being generous by making a vaccine for us. Whether the vaccine will work or not is another story, and that's material for another video altogether. But with 1.6 lakhs deaths, cancer deaths every year, 1.5 lakh road accident deaths every year, we don't see those statistics being hit at us in the face every day, do we? And we are not saying that somebody is covering up those cancer cases. Something to think about, isn't it? So what are the learnings that we can take from this 1 year of COVID experience? If we want to limit it to what the government can do, then yes, certainly the government this time, if there is a COVID phase 3, the government this time should not wait till the very end, the way it has done with phase 2. It has to make the proper infrastructure planning and implementation in time. It has to be ready, anticipating the worst, and not sit back, and preach to the world how India is the greatest solver of COVID pandemic. All those things, all those learnings are there, of course. And these are the obvious learnings. Whether the government will actually do it or not, we don't know. But most of us know that these have to be done. Better hospital infrastructure, more beds, more ICU beds, more ventilators, oxygen tanks, etc., etc., etc. But I would like to share with you some other learnings which probably the mainstream media is not really telling us every day. The first learning is we have to look at the world where there is so much diversity, and there were so many diverse ways of handling this pandemic. We can certainly look at countries which have dealt with it completely in a different way, not in the way that the bulk of the world has done it, with their lockdown rules, with their protocols, with their treatment protocols. They have done it in a different way. And there is much to learn, because apparently they have handled it much better. Sweden is one example. The Sweden case mortality rate is the same as India's, 1.3. It is lesser than many European countries. It is lesser than in France and Germany. And yet Sweden went with it with a completely different view, with a completely different vision of the disease and what it means to society, and what is the appropriate treatment needed for it. They did not believe in complete lockdowns. They never had a lockdown. Their economy did not close down like the rest of the world did. They targeted the elder population for protection, and allowed the younger population beneath 50 or 45 to largely continue with their normal affairs, but with some guidelines for precautions. Third, they did not panic and announce vaccination for all. It's a country which has said that we will first vaccinate the elderly, we will wait and watch. And they are a country which has openly said that they believe in natural immunity. Now this, you need not agree immediately with Sweden, or you need not immediately disagree also. We can look, for example, at other countries also, Singapore, how it is handled, to have a case fatality rate of only 0.1. It's a very small place, yes, but even a small place like Goa can look at Singapore and learn from it. So there are many ways of looking at this crisis, and at a government level, at an administration level, at a level of medical administration also, I think we have to learn. That's a learning I think we should all take from this, that we should look at the diverse ways and study it, and then take the best practices from all of that. Learning number 2 is related to learning number 1. We also must learn from Indian experiences. The Indian experience of using herbal treatments, the Indian medical viewpoint, Ayurvedic viewpoint of prevention rather than cure, and of a wide range of herbal tonics available and available in a decentralized way, all over the country, herbal concoctions for preventing and for raising immunity. All these are also things that our government must look at. And I think India itself, being such a diverse country, north and south, east and west, our weather patterns are different, temperatures are different, our ecosystems are different. I think one should encourage each place. For instance, I'm here at Sawantwadi. I wish our collector here, our local administration was given the freedom to look at our case uniquely, and specifically, and that they would be encouraged, to handle the crisis in a way best suited locally, rather than follow the one pill, is good for all kind of philosophy. A third learning, especially for the medical community and also for our health ministries, is how this one protocol way of treating, you have to give corticosteroids, and then you have to give some anti-blood clotting medicine, and then you have to give remdesivir, etc. This is not the only story. This single story of protocol of treatment is the one that is most widely publicized. It is the one with the strongest lobby in the WHO and in various health administrations of various countries. But this is not the only story. There are leading doctors, very famous doctors from leading institutions in the world, who have tried other forms of treatment based on their clinical observations. And those stories, if you look at the internet, it's there. Our mainstream media doesn't even look at these options. But on the internet is there. I'll put a link of some of these sources in the test description below. You can have a look. I'll give you two or three examples. One is Dr. Chetty from South Africa in Durban. He's treated 4,000 patients, out of which probably only one required to be hospitalized, and even he was all right later. And the thing is that a majority of his patients, more than 90-95%, did not even need oxygen. And how did he do it? He did not follow this standard WHO protocol. What he learned from his observations was that what COVID-19 does is to create a hypersensitivity in the patient. It's a little similar to an allergic reaction, a very severe allergic reaction. And so he used a different treatment. He used a range of antihistamines. And in his observation, there was 100% it was effective in his 4,000 odd patients, and it was 100% saved everyone's lives without the need for oxygen. According to him, if antihistamines are given at the right time, early treatment, then the patient doesn't even go into low oxygen level severity. A second example is what happened in the US from two places, if I can recall, from Texas and also from New York. And these doctors, they used ivermectin. Now this is a drug, an antibacterial drug, and they found it most effective. They said if this is given in the first few days of infection, Early treatment again, first few days of infection. Then it reduces the load of the corona-19 virus spectacularly. This is their language. I'm not saying it. They said it is spectacular the way it is acting on the COVID-19 virus, and they've used it most effectively. And many of these doctors have also come to the US Senate hearings and presented their case. Unfortunately, there is so much of a power game going on, within the WHO, and they did not take such, and there may be many more such examples, but the power lobby in the WHO did not accept these, and so the mainstream health advice is still that wait till it gets severe. If it gets severe, then bring him to a hospital, and then the treatment of oxygen and remdesivir, etc., which goes contrary to these other experiences which said early treatment and avoid the severity itself. So that is another learning that we have. I think our administration, our government must, and us also, all of us. I mean, today the internet is available, research is available. We must satisfy ourselves in our hearts that the treatment being given either to one of us in our family or in friends, or generally in community, is along the right lines. And why did the WHO and the big governments not want ivermectin to be prescribed, to be even suggested or recommended? There could be many reasons, but I will tell you one reason which is very, very plausible. Ivermectin was invented in 1996 and its patent has expired. It is available for a few hundred rupees. Whereas remdesivir, despite it being known that it is no good for COVID, is the recommended drug by the WHO, by the FDA in America, and then the rest of the world follows whatever the FDA does. And remdesivir, one course of one remdesivir costs $3,000. Someone somewhere is making a lot of money out of the COVID crisis, isn't it? So in conclusion, this is not a video about death. This is a video about life and living, about being healthy, and about prevention, about the ingenuity in various diverse human communities to be able to come up with locally strong solutions to this crisis, and how we must not limit ourselves to this one expert knows all, and then put all our eggs in one basket. Is that the phrase? And I feel this is not over, and that is why I made this video. I had one of my own family, my brother, who suffered from COVID. He's getting better now, and having observed that, and also having observed the various quality work being done, all over the world, I felt that I must share this with you, that we have to be prepared in a different way, rather than just stocking up on remdesivir and oxygen cylinders and ventilators and more oxygen beds. I think we have to look at it with a wider perspective and with some wisdom that we surely must have gained from the experience so far. May all of you be healthy and happy always. Namaskar.